In the 1870s, among the Winta Ute, dogs were part of daily life and the economy. They served in light transport with travois, supported hunts, guarded camps, and marked rights. Even after the adoption of the horse and the pressure of the reservations, they retained practical and symbolic value, mediating family ties and the circulation of goods. A photo taken in 1948 shows the final gathering of survivors of the Battle of Little Bighorn, fought in 1876. Gathered on the battlefield, Lakota and Cheyenne elders and 7th Cavalry veterans recalled the clash and honored the dead. The meeting marked the end of a cycle of direct testimonies about the Plains Wars. In 1885, Sitting Bull, Hunkpapa Lakota Chief, lived under surveillance after surrendering in 1881 and leaving captivity in 1883. Residing in Standing Rock, he was granted permission to join Buffalo Bill's show for a few months. He used part of the payment for his community and remained a symbol of resistance to treaties and colonial expansion. 7 leaders of the Crow Nation pose in front of a building in Montana, 1887. The record is set in the context of negotiations with federal authorities, when chiefs visited administrative centers to address reservation boundaries, provisions, and government mediation. The scene illustrates Native political visibility in the late 19th century. In 1912, near Winslow, Arizona, a Navajo mother poses with her children and a dog. The scene records clothing and utensils of pastoral daily life, with the desert in the background and the expanding railroad. The portrait captures family, seasonal mobility, and adjustments to the pressures of the period. It indicates sheep herding and changes in federal policies. I'll leave a secret bonus in the pinned comment for those who love the Old West. Don't miss it. It's for a limited time. Studio portrait of Jimmy Sequent, a member of the Northern Shoshone, taken in Pocatello, Idaho in 1897. The image, made in a posed environment with controlled lighting, records his Native identity during a period of political transformations in the American West. Edward S. Curtis's record of Cheyenne dancers at the Sundance in 1900 Montana. The annual rite, a core of spiritual renewal and social cohesion, persisted despite federal repressive measures. Ceremonial attire and the central tree indicate the setup of the camp. Hand-colored photograph of Chief Bone Necklace of the Oglala Lakota Nation, circa 1899. The studio portrait follows the late 19th century practice of applying pigments over black and white prints to highlight clothing, ornaments, and status. It records leadership during the reservation period and assimilation policies. In 1908, during the Montana winter, 2 Apsaluk on horseback wait in front of a tipi surrounded by a snowy pine forest, in the traditional territory of the Crow Nation. The scene records mobility and shelter, with horses as the axis of movement and hunting. The camp highlights seasonal adaptation and cultural continuity in harsh conditions. In 1914, 2 Navajo men mount their horses at the base of Shiprock, Tsebitai, in northwestern New Mexico, in the Four Corners region. The record shows mobility and pastoral work, when Dine families moved between pastures and villages, under increasing federal administration and boarding schools, with links to local markets. Studio portrait of an unidentified Ute man, taken in Denver, Colorado, around 1861. The image, produced in a controlled environment, records the clothing and bearing of the subject and bears witness to the Ute presence in the region at the beginning of territorial expansion and the work of commercial photographers in the West. Little Soldier, leader of a northwestern Shoshone band in the Utah Territory in 1869, acted amid the railroad expansion and the effects of the Bear River Massacre, 1863. He led seasonal migrations, mediated conflicts with settlers and the Army, seeking to preserve hunting and fishing routes in the face of settlement pressure. Studio portrait of 4 Apache Scouts, 1888. Recruited by the U.S. Army since 1871, they served as guides and trackers in the final campaigns of the Southwest. They pose in uniform, with rifles and bandanas, indicating military integration and identity. The image records the post-Geronimo period and the native role in active border surveillance. Alone with the past. In 1913, two Dean Navajo observed from the bottom of Canyon de Chelly, Arizona, the Casablanca ruins, an ancient ancestral Pueblo settlement built in sandstone niches and occupied between the 11th and 14th centuries. The scene records indigenous continuity in the face of pre-contact remains. Today, a protected area as a national monument. Thatlo Harjo, born in 1791, joined the Seminole forces and fought in both Seminole Wars. In 1842, he was removed to Indian Territory. During the Civil War in 1861, he enlisted in the 1st Regiment. After the conflict, he settled in the area that would become Seminole County, Oklahoma, with other Seminoles. He died in 1904 at the age of 113. In 1874, a group of Southern Paiutes agreed to pose for a photograph. The session, typical of the period, took place in a setting prepared by the photographer, possibly linked to a trading post in the region. The portrait served purposes of record and study, fixing faces, everyday clothing, and native presence under the pressure of colonial expansion. Uinta Paiute hunter, standing in the arid plateau landscape of southwestern Utah, aims a rifle around 1873. The scene marks transition, trade weapons, subsistence hunting, settler pressure, and federal policies that limited mobility and territories. Clothing and gear suggest seasonal movement between valleys and rivers. In 1906, the Salish leader known as Chief Eagle, Atoam Elam Wot Skill Me, was portrayed on the Flathead Reservation, Montana. The image, made under federal assimilation and land management policies, records clothing and insignia of authority, and helps to understand Salish hierarchies and identities at the beginning of the 20th century, amid tribal disputes. Portrait of Red Hawk, Oglala Lakota warrior, taken by Edward S. Curtis in the Badlands, South Dakota, around 1905. The image records a leader in the post-Plains Wars transition, when Lakota communities lived under the reservation system and sought to preserve language, rights, and tribal authority in the face of federal assimilation policy. Chief Joseph, leader of the Nez Perce of the Wallowa Valley, Oregon, stood out in the War of 1877 by leading his group in the retreat toward Canada, trying to avoid forced removal by the U.S. Army. After surrendering in Montana, he became a native spokesperson and traveled to Washington, advocating for a return to the ancestral Northwest. Portrait of Eastern Shoshone leader Washakie, taken by William Henry Jackson around 1870 in Wyoming. Made during Western survey expeditions linked to geology and the railroad, the record presents the chief in representative attire and is part of the visual corpus that documented native negotiations and displacements in the period. Looking Glass, Alalimia Takanin, Nez Perce war chief, stood out in the 1877 campaign. After federal pressures for removal, he defended a strategic retreat through Idaho to Montana, seeking support from the Crow. He faced Big Hole and other actions, leading the flight toward Canada, until falling at Bear Paw, when the resistance collapsed in October. Irontail, Oglala Lakota chief, became a public figure in Buffalo Bill's Wild West tours. His profile inspired, in 1913, the U.S. 5-cent nickel. Alongside Black Diamond, a famous bison from New York zoos, he symbolizes the meeting of native memory and the frontier myth in the early 20th century. Chief Red Cloud, Oglala Lakota, portrayed at 77 years old in 1898 by J.H. Bratley. A decisive political and military leader in the wars over the Black Hills region, he became a central negotiator after the Treaty of Fort Laramie, 1868, witnessing the transition of Lakota power in the face of U.S. expansion. The portrait marks his final authority. In 1890, in Oklahoma, Quanah Parker, son of Chief Peta Nocona, and the Anglo-American captive Cynthia Ann, consolidated himself as the last recognized Comanche chief. He led the Quahati in the final campaigns, surrendered in 1875, and negotiated life on the reservation. He became a cattle rancher, advocate of peyotism, and mediator between authorities and his people. In 1886, at Fort Bowie, Nietzsche, son of Cochise and Geronimo Chiricahua leaders, negotiated surrender to the U.S. Army after years of flight. The removal was decided as prisoners of war of warriors and families. The act ended Apache resistance in the Southwest and preceded the boarding for exile in Florida, by rail and under federal custody. A photograph from 1905 records 4 Navajo horsemen in Canon del Muerto, a branch of Canyon de Chelly, Arizona. In Dine territory, the scene reveals mobility and trade networks maintained despite federal assimilation policies. The use of the horse and the route through the canyon indicate cultural continuity and control of space in the early 20th century. Soldier of the 10th U.S. Cavalry Regiment poses alongside 3 Apache scouts at Fort Whipple, Arizona Territory, around 1885. The image records military cooperation in the final period of the Apache Wars, when regular units and native auxiliaries took part in patrols and capture operations.